The rain had stopped, leaving the London streets glistening under the gray sky, but inside the private quarters of Clarence House, the atmosphere was far from calm. It was a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2023, just weeks before the ancient and sacred rite of the coronation. For Queen Camilla, the days were a blur of rehearsals, diplomatic audiences, and dress fittings. Yet, on this particular morning, a disruption of a different kind occurred, one that had nothing to do with seating charts or ancient liturgy. It began with a problem in the Queen's main wardrobe. A senior member of the royal household, a woman who had served the late Queen Elizabeth II for decades before being reassigned to Camilla's staff, had discovered a fault with the climate control system in the primary storage room. Concerned about the delicate fabrics housed within, she ordered a team of palace stewards to conduct an immediate inventory check and temporary relocation of the most valuable pieces to a secondary, climate-stable antechamber. What the stewards found when they opened the large, ornate double doors was a treasure trove of royal fashion. Racks of tailored Fiona Clare day dresses, shelves of Anello and David pumps, and boxes of gloves were carefully catalogued and moved. But it was at the very back of the wardrobe. It's behind a row of heavy winter coats that hadn't seen the light of day in years where the discovery was made. Tucked away, almost forgotten, stood a massive, dusty, and seemingly immovable object, a vast, fabric-covered storage box, nearly 5 feet long and 3 feet wide. It bore no modern labeling, just a faded luggage tag in a looping handwritten script that read simply, HMY Britannia, 1953. The head steward, a meticulous man named Davies, recognized the provenance immediately, and he knew that 1953 was the year of the late Queen's coronation. Before touching anything, he sent for the senior dresser, Angela. When Angela arrived, the room fell silent. With white-gloved hands, she carefully unclipped the brass fastenings of the box. As the lid creaked open, a faint scent of mothballs and cedar gave way to something else. A wisp of a perfume that Angela immediately recognized. It was the signature scent of Queen Elizabeth II, and a smell that had lingered in rooms long after she had left them. Inside, nestled in layers of acid-free tissue paper, was the late Queen's coronation robe of estate. It was not the humble robe worn during the anointing, but the magnificent, awe-inspiring theatrical cloak worn as Elizabeth II left Westminster Abbey. It was a river of purple velvet, so deep and rich it seemed to absorb the light, cascading for an astonishing 6.5 meters. The train was a galaxy of embroidery, in shimmering with the golden wheat sheaves and olive branches of the United Kingdom, picked out in real gold thread. It was a garment of state so heavy and cumbersome that it required a team of young page boys to carry it. But it wasn't just the robe. Beneath it, carefully folded, was the accompanying linen and lace coronation dress, designed by Norman Hartnell. It was a masterpiece of ivory silk, embroidered with floral emblems of the Commonwealth in crystal, gold thread, and seed pearls. And the staff was stunned. According to palace records, this robe had been moved from Buckingham Palace years ago. Some assumed it had been returned to the royal collection, perhaps destined for a museum. Others thought it had been relegated to one of the royal stores like the Royal Mews, where Queen Elizabeth, ever frugal, was known to have kept uniforms and garments for decades rather than replace them. And there were even stories that staff members had to be found to fit existing Victorian livery because the late Queen refused to buy new ones. It seemed the late monarch's thriftiness extended to her own wardrobe. Rather than commissioning a brand new storage solution, she had simply packed away her heaviest regalia and sent it to a place where she knew it would be safe, the home of her daughter-in-law. Queen Camilla was informed of the discovery during a break in her schedule. As she entered the wardrobe room, her eyes fixed on the open box. For a long moment, she simply stared at the purple velvet. The item was not listed on any inventory she had been given. It held no official paperwork. It was, in effect, a ghost in the palace. Camilla reached out a hand and gently touched the fabric. She knew, perhaps better than anyone in that room, the weight of what they were looking at. This was not just a dress. It was the physical embodiment of a 16-year-old princess who had suddenly become the queen of a fading empire. It represented a reign of 70 years, of sacrifice, of duty, and of a stoicism that Camilla herself had often struggled to understand in the early years of her relationship with Charles. Her mind drifted to the history. She knew the stories of that robe, how it had been designed during a time of post-war austerity. The queen had used clothing ration coupons to pay for the silk for her wedding dress, and while the coronation was grander, the sentiment was the same: a duty to the nation, a sacrifice of the self to the crown. Camilla thought of her own upcoming coronation dress, a simpler, more modern creation by Bruce Oldfield, embroidered with flowers, bees, and a tribute to her love of reading. It felt, in this moment, almost frivolous compared to the heavy silk and gold thread before her. But it was the letters that broke the composure of everyone in the room. Tucked into a silk pouch sewn into the lining of the box was a bundle of correspondence, tied with a simple white ribbon. They were letters between the young Queen Elizabeth and her mother, also named Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. They discussed the coronation. In one, the young queen fretted about the weight of the robe, worrying she might trip. In another, the Queen Mother reassured her, in writing of her own experience in 1937, of the feeling of the cool metal of the crown on her head, and the roar of the crowd that sounded like the ocean. Camilla read one of the letters aloud, her voice soft.
"My darling Mama," it began, "I felt you with me today, as I know you will be with Lilibet when her time comes. The robe is heavy, but love makes it light."
It was a message passed down through generations. Lilibet had been the Queen's family nickname, and the letter was a direct line to the women who had worn this cloth before. The discovery posed a logistical and protocol nightmare. The robe was technically the property of the sovereign, now King Charles III. But it was also a deeply personal artifact. Camilla knew that her husband was already dealing with the stresses of a modernizing monarchy, from the fallout of the Sussexes' departure to the public debates about the cost of the crown. The last thing he needed was a debate about his mother's clothes being found in his wife's closet. But Camilla also saw an opportunity. For years, she had lived in the shadow of Diana, Princess of Wales, and had often been criticized for her fashion choices, with French media frequently pointing out her lack of style compared to other European royals. She was seen as dowdy, as someone who clung to outdated patterns. Yet here, in her own home, was the ultimate symbol of royal fashion history. And it was decaying. Upon closer inspection by the Royal Collection Trust, the news was not good. The velvet, while structurally sound, was showing signs of fading. The gold thread was tarnished in places. The silk of the dress beneath was developing yellowing and had a distinct musty odor, a common issue with textiles stored for decades without proper ventilation. It needed urgent professional conservation. When the king was told, he came immediately. Charles III stood in the room looking at his mother's robe. He ran his fingers over the embroidery, his eyes distant. He recalled, as a 4-year-old boy watching his mother leave for the abbey, a tiny figure disappearing under a mountain of velvet and silk. He remembered the pride and the fear he felt, not understanding why his parents looked so serious on what seemed like a day of fairy tales. "This should go to the public," Charles said quietly, turning to Camilla. They should see it." Camilla nodded, but she had a different idea. "It will go to the public," she agreed. "But first, it should be used. Charles, this robe is a part of you. It is the fabric of your family. Perhaps it needs to be seen one last time in the light, before it goes behind glass." The king looked puzzled. What do you mean? Camilla took a breath. The day after the coronation, there will be portraits. Official portraits. I will be wearing my new robe, my new dress. But what if you wore this? What if you stood next to me, not in your new robes, but in hers? The image of the son, in the robes of his mother, standing beside his queen. It would tell the story of continuity, of heritage. It would honor her in a way a museum display never could. The idea was unprecedented. Robes of estate were traditionally worn only by the monarch for whom they were made. For Charles to don his mother's robe would be a radical, deeply personal statement. The following weeks were a secret mission. Conservators worked around the clock in a private room at Clarence House, gently cleaning the velvet, stabilizing the embroidery, and treating the silk. Camilla visited them often, watching their meticulous work. She learned about the 18 different types of gold thread used, the symbolism of the Canadian maple leaf, and the Pakistani wheat. She was learning the language of her new country, thread by thread. On the morning of the coronation, May 6, 2023, the world watched as Charles and Camilla processed to Westminster Abbey. Camilla, in her Bruce Oldfield dress and the refashioned Queen Mary's crown, a choice that had cleverly avoided the controversy of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, looked every inch the queen. But later, in the green drawing room of Buckingham Palace, the real moment occurred. After the ceremony, while the guests sipped champagne, the king and queen retreated for the private portraits. Camilla was helped out of her heavy train. Diane Charles was carefully dressed in the robe that had been found in the wardrobe. It fit. It was meant to fit. When the photographer, Hugo Bernand, lifted his camera, he saw a king who was not just wearing a robe, but who was enveloped by history. Charles stood tall, but his eyes held a softness rarely seen in public. Beside him, Camilla placed a hand on his arm, her rings, including the Queen Consort's ring made for Queen Adelaide in 1831, glinting in the light. She wasn't just the queen, and she was the guardian of this history, the one who had found it, saved it, and brought it back into the light. In the final portrait, now hanging in Buckingham Palace, the robe is the star. It cascades around the king, a river of purple and gold. And if one looks closely, one can see that the queen is not looking at the camera. She is looking at her husband with an expression that suggests she knows exactly where he came from and exactly what she has found. But the discovery in the wardrobe did not make headlines at the time. The story was buried under the pomp of the day, but within palace circles the story is told differently. It is said that Camilla, the woman once reviled for breaking up a marriage, became in that moment the woman who found and preserved the most intimate relic of the late queen's legacy. She had opened a wardrobe and found not just a robe, but a bridge between the past and the future, securing her own place in the long, as unbroken line of the monarchy.